If you watch the movie The Social Network, it's really interesting. They go from like dorm room at Harvard, and then literally 10 minutes later, they're like in this massive office with hundreds of employees, right? And I was just thinking in my head, like, what happens in the middle? Because in the middle, there's so many problems and there's so many people problems. High quality people are drawn to high quality founders. If you essentially take capital and you hire a bunch of B people or low quality people, then the company's not going to succeed. Why does this company exist? What purpose does this company serve? That mission is going to be what draws people to the company. My name is Tim Hwang, founder and CEO of FiscalNote. FiscalNote is a legal and information data and company where we collect laws and regulations and help people to understand how laws potentially impact their organizations. We service everyone from the White House, the CDC. We recently went public for over $1 billion. To the subscribers of EO, we're definitely interested in talking about the challenges of building a company in the US, B2B market and startup landscape, and of course, how to build a unicorn startup globally. Yeah, enjoy. Building a startup requires the founder to have a very strong sense of mission. Why does this company exist? What purpose does this company serve? That mission is going to be what draws people to the company. And the people that are attracted to that mission are going to find your company very, very compelling because you know what? Like life is extremely short. In that short amount of time, do you want to go a 9-to-5 job making somebody else wealthy? Or do you want to come and change the world? Now imagine this, you're a software engineer, making a decent amount of money, 6 figures, and you get a cold email from a startup founder. So I have this company, the product is not built. We just raised a small amount of money. Do you want to quit your job and come work for us? And take a huge pay cut and maybe a little bit of stock. 90%, 95% people would say no. Why would I do that? I have such a comfortable life. Your job as a founder or CEO is to convince that person that this company is going to be a unicorn and to look them straight in the face and say, you're going to quit your job. You're going to take this opportunity because it's a once in a lifetime or twice in a lifetime opportunity and you're not going to regret it. Because high quality people are drawn to high quality founders. If you essentially take capital and you hire a bunch of B people or low quality people, then the company's not going to succeed. And I would say for FiscalNote, we typically, almost in every case, with the exception of 1 or 2, have acquired founder-driven companies. For me, founder-driven companies are very different. They're very special because the founders themselves picked each person individually in their organization. They also have a very strong sense of responsibility of making this company a success. They also typically have taken some level of venture capital, so there's sort of this very aggressive speed mindset. And they typically tend to treat their employees very, very well, almost like a family-like environment. If you combine that experimentation and bias for action and family-like environment and sense of ownership, that's a really great culture to have. And it's something that we had at FiscalNote for a long time. I don't know what it is, but I think when we were very, very young, and we had a very, very, very good team. We had computer science PhDs quit their jobs. We had people who had come from the military. We had this very strong sense of mission. Even though we had a small amount of time, I think that very quickly we built a team that was going to stick together for good times and bad. At FiscalNote, we were probably working 16 hours a day, 7 days a week for almost 2 years. I told my employees actually, I need you in the office somewhere between 9:30 and 10, 7 days a week, every single day. Right now, at a seed stage company, we have 18 exact months to basically hit a particular milestone. You need to be in the office 7 days a week. I think that in those types of cases, having a founder or CEO that's able to draw and attract a team that has the same mindset and the same mentality, I think is extremely important. Just because you receive investment doesn't mean that you're going to succeed. It's actually higher likelihood that you're going to fail. Because at this point, you've taken the money from the investors and you now have to spend it. And you have to spend it very quickly because the market is changing, the landscape's changing, competitors popping up. Investors expect you to generate a return in a particular amount of time. The timing is probably the most important thing, in my opinion. And it depends on the sector, right? And technology, the good thing about technology is that these timing trends happen all the time. 2007, Steve Jobs gets up and he introduces the iPhone. That launches is a whole next 10 years of mobile investing, mobile companies, mobile startups. That trend, you have to be able to jump on it immediately. From a startup perspective, when you pick the idea, you have to understand not just why does this company exist, but why now? Why is this timing right now the perfect timing for the company? In my opinion, actually, having done startups now for almost 10 years, I think that's probably one of the most important questions that founders have to ask themselves. Why is the timing for this exactly right now? Why wasn't it 5 years ago or 10 years ago? Why isn't it 5 years from now? And I think that if you can get that timing exactly correct, then the startup should be able to ride the tailwinds of some general market trend. The biggest decisions that we made were always about people. People problems are what really, really break down companies. Particularly for Series A or Series B companies, those companies have significant management issues. If you watch the movie The Social Network, it's really interesting. They go from like their dorm room at Harvard, and then literally 10 minutes later, they're like in this massive office with hundreds of employees, right? And I was just thinking in my head, like, what happens in the middle? Because in the middle, there's so many problems and there's so many people problems. And I remember when I was a Series A founder, Series B founder, every time executive would quit, I'd have to jump in there and have to manage the entire team myself. And so, suddenly I go from managing maybe like 4 or 5 people to managing like 20 people overnight. I have to do damage control and, all these different things. And so startups it's a very, very, very analytical job. It's very self-reflective. It's almost like swimming. You have to constantly know what your limits are, what your energy level is, all these different things. I think startups the same thing, right? Everything stops and starts with you. You founded the company. It was your idea. You take responsibility. At that level, you have to know, what are my strengths? What are my weaknesses? Where am I going to fail? Where are my blind spots? And if you don't know what those fundamental kind of personality traits or flaws are for you, then it's going to be very hard to do your job. And if you can really hone in on what that is, that kind of mentality is constant, because when you make a mistake, you put that into your framework. You make another mistake, you put that into your framework. For instance, for me, I have a bias when I'm hiring executives, right? I look very heavily at the resume, and I don't interview enough, for particular skill sets. And so I've definitely made that mistake almost one too many times, where you overhire on the resume, you underhire on the personality traits. I had to train myself to remove that bias from my head to make better decisions. That, again, is a very introspective thing. You just have to constantly be thinking about that on a daily basis. I spent the entirety of my 20s building a company. From the moment I woke up to the moment I went to sleep, every single day, I was thinking about how to make the company successful. When a lot of people ask me, should I start a company? Should I start a startup? I just tell them, you really need to know what you're getting yourself into. I mean, you are committing to an obsession. You need to make mistakes, get to a point where, you have significant hardship, and then you essentially learn from that hardship. There are times when I was starting FiscalNote, Series A, Series C, Series D, the times were very, very challenging for sure. Right before our Series A closed, as an example, maybe about 6 weeks of cash left in the bank. I had to call all of our employees in, and I had to tell them that, our Series A fell through and I need to go back to Silicon Valley, I need to, try and raise funding again. Those types of situations, when you're basically put face to face against like complete failure, are the places where you grow the most. The last couple of years in FiscalNote, I'm definitely growing as a founder, but the thing I really want to do is continue to maintain my early stage mindset and be very, very plugged into the early startup trends and investment trends and the like. That, I think, is becoming more difficult for sure. And I'm definitely trying to continue to keep my 0 to 1 kind of founder mentality as much as possible. When you succeed, it's a unbelievable feeling. I'm lucky to be the youngest Asian American publicly traded CEO on the NASDAQ or the New York Stock Exchange. And when I reflect upon the last couple of years of my life and what it took to get there, I think that it's definitely an amazing sense of accomplishment. To be honest, I definitely feel like I missed out on a lot of things, right? I mean, but you sort of give something up to gain something else, and I think that at least for me, it was definitely worth it in the long run. I definitely don't regret it for sure.